Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, today we're going to dive back into some BlueJay. He's got a new video out called How to Win the Cold War. It's about 27 minutes long, so this will be a long one today, so buckle up, settle in. This is, at least if we're starting in 1987, these are events that I lived through, so it's not often I get to talk about history that I remember personally firsthand. I was 10 years old in 1987, remember well the events of the end of the Cold War. It's a very different world we live in today, just even in terms of the map. We had countries that existed then that don't exist today. We have countries that exist today that didn't exist then, all connected in some way to the Cold War. We had East and West Germany still at that time. I grew up with Germany being two countries. So it's a fascinating time in world history that I think we don't talk enough about. So the link is in the description. Hopefully you've already seen BlueJay's video. If you haven't, I would encourage you to check it out. And even if you don't check it out before watching this video, please check out some of his other content. We want to be supporting our original content creators as much as possible. Speaking of original content, Stories of the Great War, my channel dedicated exclusively to my original content about World War I, is live. It's got about 1,500 subscribers in the first week, so if you haven't already checked it out, please do. There will be some new original content exclusive to that channel that has never been on this channel that'll be going up in the next couple of days, so check that out. Let's dive in.
The year is 1987, and Matthias Royst was going to save the world. The West German teen wasn't a fan of living as the sauerkraut in the middle of the world's sauciest nuclear sandwich.
So this is a great point, because at this time, this is the focal point, right? So you have NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which forms after World War II with all of what we call the Western Allies, because everybody knew toward the end of the war in Europe in 1945 that there was going to be a post-war world in which there was going to be a huge divide. Winston Churchill starts talking about an iron curtain that's going to descend on Eastern Europe, and basically that's what he's talking about, is all of that area that becomes part of what is known as the Warsaw Pact, which is the Soviet Union's answer to NATO. And so East Germany, Germany was divided into 4 zones after World War II, occupation zones. The French, the Americans, and the British occupied the 3 western zones, which will become West Germany. East Germany is the Soviet zone. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, they're all a part. Yugoslavia kind of to an extent too, but by this point it's not. They're all kind of a part of the influence of the Soviet Union at this point. So the battleground, kind of ground zero, is Germany. That's where everybody expects, if there is a ground war that's going to break out between West and East, that it's going to be there.
Especially when neither side could agree to lay off the plutonium mayo. I guess I have to solve this myself, said the stupid boy. So the 18-year-old wrote a 20-page manifesto, a sentence that normally screams stay home from school, but this manifesto detailed instructions for Gorbachev on how to advance world peace. The next steps of his plan were rather simple. All he had to do was take this manifesto, hop in a Cessna, and fly from the west directly into Moscow, where he could hand-deliver it to Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev himself. With only 50
So you'll notice, and I don't know the details of why he chose the route that he did, but it seems to me that a flight going directly from the west probably looks a lot more suspicious and has a lot more likelihood of getting shot down than one that comes in over Scandinavia instead and comes through Helsinki. And comes from Finland. There was an incident where the Soviets shot down a plane not coming from the west but coming from Korea. Because it hadn't been identified. And that very well could have happened to this guy too, except he was in a small plane.
Moscow, where he could hand-deliver it to Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev himself. With only 50 hours of flight experience, Matthias took to the skies and into Soviet territory. Air defenses were put on high alert. Soviet MiGs pulled up next to and flew by him. But much like an Activision Blizzard employee, Matthias wasn't going to take no for an answer. Through sheer dumb luck, every surface-to-air missile and fighter jet was denied permission to engage, assuming he was just...
And part of this, I think probably, so we're talking 1987. Let's talk about the Korean Airlines for a minute. So back in 1983, there had been Korean Airlines flight 007, September 1st, 1983. It was shot down by Soviet air forces due to navigation errors. So they had strayed into Soviet territory. It had started in JFK, went to Anchorage, Alaska, and then was flying towards South Korea. And they stray over into Soviet territory, and they get shot down. 269 people are killed on this plane. And so you can see here, right here, where they flew over the Kamchatka Peninsula. They were supposed to fly this way outside of the Soviet airspace, and they fly right over it. And so I'm guessing there's a bit of hesitance on the part of the Soviets to make the same mistake, even though they're dealing with a much smaller plane this time.
Just a dumb student with his transponder turned off. They realized their mistake too late once Matthias landed an aircraft directly onto Red Square, marking the first time a German invasion ever got to Moscow. What would Lenin think if he could see this? Oh, he's right there. After limited mingling, since he forgot one thing during his packing for a Russian diplomatic mission, the Russian language, he was arrested by the KGB and charged with not only violation of flight laws, but also malicious hooliganism, which if you've ever pounded dollaritas at Applebee's with Trey, you understand that term all too well. The embarrassment of the Soviet military gave Gorbachev the opportunity to push reforms and sack hundreds of military officials once it was...
So Mikhail Gorbachev is a guy who is instrumental in the end of the Cold War. It didn't matter how many Western leaders you had railing against the Soviet Union, and I'm not saying that didn't put some pressure on it. I'm not discounting the part that folks like Ronald Reagan play in all of this with his hard line against the Soviets, but nothing was ever going to change as long as you had two hardliners just continuing to go at each other. If you had a Putin in charge of the Soviets at this time, if anything, it probably gets worse. The fact that Gorbachev comes to power and he's willing to look at reforms, he's willing to say, you know what, we need to make some changes in our country. This is not possible, and this gives him an opening to do that. There might have been other leaders in the Soviet Union's history who were willing to do that, but never really felt like they had the opportunity or the opening to do it. He gets one here.
Shown they couldn't even shoot down a measly civilian aircraft, except for that one time. While he wasn't able to build his imaginary bridge between East and West, having at least somewhat of an impact helps Matthias handle this rejection well, but apparently only for 2 years, as he later stabbed a woman to the brink of death for it.
Oh, wow.
Why are you telling me all this?
Well, you gotta figure the guy had to have had something not altogether right in the head to have done what he did in the first place. There was something a little off about him, so I guess that shouldn't come as a surprise.
Some food for thought, Alex, because now it's up to you to end the Cold War and save the world. What? Why me? Why can't you leave me alone? Well, as you can see, I didn't do all that great of a job at it, and also, you're a lot of fun for me. But don't worry.
So, I should probably address, because some folks who didn't grow up in this era or haven't studied this era of history might wonder, why do we call it a Cold War? Well, what that means is it's not hot. It means that there's not actively combat going on. Like the United States and Soviet Union never directly went to war with each other. The Western, like NATO nations and the Soviet Union never went to war directly with each other. But there's a lot of proxy situations. I mean, Vietnam's part of the Cold War. Korea really is kind of one of the early stages of the Cold War. Afghanistan becomes part of the Cold War in the 80s. There's parts of the Cold War going on in the Western Hemisphere. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a part of that. It's all of these ways in which tension is there, and there's conflict and an escalation militarily, and even proxy wars that happen, but no direct hot fighting between the two nations, or the two sides, I should say.
Worry, champ, I've got a titillating tally of tales of wacky capitalist and commie shenanigans to help teach even you how to win the Cold War.
He was really in a Pizza Hut commercial. You can't out Pizza Hut.
All right, Alex, let's take you back to... Sorry about that, Alex. One got away.
What? You and the...
One what? Just a piece of my soul. I had the boys in the lab split mine up. Split your soul? Why? Why, to put the pieces in the marketable plushies, of course. Kinda like Harry Potter, but less stupid and British. Introducing the first limited edition BlueJay plushie. I partnered up with the folks at U2's for my first ever merch drop, creating a dazzling little dude that's perfect for all your plushie needs.
I like it. You
Looking
put it in
for
the
a
microwave.
ceiling decoration? Not a problem. Need a confidant you can trust with all your secrets? He won't tell his soul. We tried. Want to put him in a jar? You
They
can.
waterboarded him.
Mad at me for making a mistake in a video? Brits use miles, not kilometers! Well, do we have an anger outlet for you? Jealous of my outdoor content adventures? Well, now you too can wiggle a bird plushie in front of a camera in public. It's too much fun! Still not convinced? Why don't I let this official review from Adam Driver change your mind? Merch. But my soul can only be split into so many pieces before I'm reduced to a shallow husk of a bird. So click the link below and throw your money at your screen before it sells out forever.
That was
and
good.
Now, back to the video. It's the mid-1940s. The end credits roll on the World War sequel, and the Allies are partying in Berlin to celebrate Hitler's first good painting. But the fanfare can only be short-lived, as a new tension was already brewing over the world's past.
Listen, I hate to even come close to anything resembling a compliment to the man, but as one who's not very good at art, I didn't think his paintings were bad.
Forward. Capitalism or communism? At the helm of this debate were the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, both of whom fought harder to collect economic allies than Nazi scientists. There was only room for one top gamer in this post-World War II scene, and as the main actors were now considering a trilogy, one was feeling rather confident with their early access to the nuclear DLC. And that is why we must abolish private property. Break free of your chains, comrade. Ah, I see. That makes a lot of sense.
I think everyone understood that the Soviet Union was going to get the bomb. It was only a matter of time, and I think it was 1949 when they finally get it. The big concern was when the hydrogen bomb comes about, which is the H-bomb. That's the big one. The atomic bomb can only get so big. The H-bomb's the scary, like, world destroyer one.
Sense. But see this? Pretty cool, huh? Whoa, what is that? Capitalism, baby. I like that. Just wait till you see Chia Pets. Democracy is indispensable to socialism. Yeah, okay, buddy. I didn't want to go here, but under capitalism, our boys back in Los Alamos cooked up a fun new toy for us. So you might want to reconsider. What's the matter? Gulag got your tongue? Wars were a lot more fun when you could kill civilians in very specific places, usually far away. But now that complete annihilation could be achieved from the press of a button by a teenager drafted from some farm in Idaho, countries were understandably a lot more hesitant to kick off World War III. Alright, we don't want a nuclear holocaust, so let's just set down our guns. But proxy wars aren't the only way to win the Cold War, Alex. Points towards victory could be scored through culture, intelligence, science, or military. Now,
And this is a big motivator for the race to the moon. You know, the whole 1960s are defined by the Cold War. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's Vietnam, it's the race to get to the moon first, the whole space race. That's all part of this.
let's take a look at what the US and Soviets did to try to score points in these categories. You got this idea from the Civilization games. Shut the fuck. This is different. When you think intelligence, you probably picture a charismatic Brit from the 50s, goofy spy gadgets and gizmos, or a charismatic Brit from the 60s, and maybe a certain blue bird from the internet? No? Okay. Anyway, while the reality of Cold War espionage consisted of a more mundane cocktail of surveillance and asset handling than a gin one, it did have its more shaken moments from time to time. Take Acoustic Kitty, the CIA project to transform your typical everyday cat into a world-class spy. The idea was to fit a cat with a microphone and radio and train them to approach Soviet officials to catch all that juicy commie gossip. Wouldn't they easily see a microphone and transmitter on a cat?
Some of these ideas had to have been the product of a meeting where they were sitting around saying, does anybody have any ideas? And people just started throwing stuff out there to see what would stick. And somebody in one of those meetings said, here's an idea. And that's where this comes from.
Well, only if they're on top of the skin. What? Those lab boys back in the CIA dungeons decided to cook up a little Frankenkitty, surgically implanting a microphone in a cat's ear canal, a transmitter at the base of its skull, and an antenna down the spine and tail just beneath the fur. With their crime against nature complete, they just needed to train the cat, deciding to use audio cues to control its directions. But as you cat owners already know, it doesn't matter how close you can get a cat to RoboCop, they'll always end up doing whatever they want. So while initial testing went well, outside the lab, it would just wander off whenever it got bored or hungry. And it was then that the CIA realized their mistake in this whole operation. They forgot to bypass that pesky sense of hunger. After one more operation, their abomination was now trained, wired, and hungered for nothing but tanky blood, the perfect cocktail of conditions for its first mission. Okay, we're here. Time to let the cat out of the bag. I'm reporting you to HR, Scott. Okay, Agent 009 Lives, this is what we've been training for, alright, buddy? It'll be a quick in and out, 20-minute mission. Just walk up to the guys on the bench and listen to what they have to say. Don't let curiosity kill the cat. Why are you allowed to? Because I have tenure, Scott. Alright, Agent, here we go.
Oh shit, Carl! Carl, grab me that shovel from the back. We gotta scrape this guy off.
According to Victor Marchetti, the cat was released from an unmarked van to eavesdrop on two men outside the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. when it was hit by a taxi almost immediately. Well, I know you had a lot riding on this acoustic kitty project, Ryan, but don't worry. I've had the boys back in the lab work on a new project that's sure to cheer you right up. Introducing Electric Kitty.
Oh my god.
Robert Wallace disputed this bitter end, stating that in reality, the project was abandoned because the cat was too hard to train. Therefore, the equipment was surgically removed and it lived a, quote, long and happy life afterwards. Whether you believe the comically bad ending or the suspiciously happy one is up to you. But regardless, Acoustic Kitty took 5 years and $20 million just to end up in the trash can.
And I guarantee there are so many projects like this that millions and millions of dollars have been sunk into that never saw the light of day that we have never heard about. Because, like I said, you're just throwing stuff against the wall and you're going to see what sticks.
To like my college degree. But with that big of an investment, I guess the lesson we could take away here is that there's more than one way to skin a cat. I hate you so much. How about we take a peek at Soviet espionage, Alex? Oops. Looks like someone wasn't a good double agent. Jesus, was that necessary? Yeah, nobody really likes intel leaks, especially the Soviets, whose counterintelligence programs were far superior to the West. The key to their effectiveness was quite simple. All they needed was a totalitarian state with an authoritarian government who gave them free rein to target absolutely any threat to sensitive intelligence.
That he makes a good point there. It's much easier to deal with threats, internal threats, when you're a totalitarian regime, because you can just unilaterally just deal with it. You can kill people. And in a democracy, it's much more complicated because of the concerns over a fair trial and habeas corpus and privacy laws and all those sorts of things, and having to get warrants.
Whether real or imaginary. As you can guess, many innocents were executed through these tactics. But their deaths would not be in vain, Alex, for this aggressive mindset helped perfect Soviet murder tactics. Introducing the—
Should point out, too, that doesn't mean there weren't executions in the United States. They just happened after trials. The Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were executed. And it was a pretty big deal at the time that they were executing this middle-aged married couple for espionage related to leaking nuclear secrets to the Soviets. And they were almost certainly guilty, but it was still a big deal at the time.
The Bulgarian umbrella, perfect for all your rainy day and political dissident silencing needs. While appearing as an ordinary umbrella on the surface, this crafty device contained a hidden pneumatic mechanism that shot a ricin-filled pellet just 1.5 millimeters thick, or 15/254ths the thickness of a gumball to help you visualize. This elusive gadget made perfect for an assassin who needed to masquerade as, say, a comically inconspicuous British aristocrat on his morning stroll over a London bridge, which just so happens to be the exact circumstances where one Georgy Markov was assassinated in 1978. Hello, fellow Brit. Hello. I see you've noticed my umbrella. As my babushka always said, Simrasatmir adinotrish. Oh, I mean grandmother. Why does your umbrella have a mag? In case I need to reload. You never know when you might miss. The rain. Uh-oh, looks like it's raining. Here, let me open my umbrella for you. Georgy Markov was a Bulgarian dissident writer who defected to London in 1969, where he continued to critique the Bulgarian government at the BBC and Radio Free Europe. But even with all traces of his name and books scrubbed away in Bulgaria, dictator Todor Zivkov couldn't stand Markov's continued existence smearing his name overseas. Ugh, what a day. Maybe I'll listen to some BBC. I think I've earned being a little naughty.
This just in, Bulgarian correspondent Georgy Markov has informed the BBC that Todor Zivkov, quote, pours his milk before his cereal because he's a big, stinky, dumb poopyhead. Well, I say, that is poopyhead behavior, Todd.
With technical assistance from the Soviet KGB, Zivkov had the Bulgarian Secret Service assassinate Georgy Markov on his own birthday. The writer was on Waterloo Bridge in London when he felt a sharp pain in the back of his leg and turned to find a man pick up an umbrella and immediately step into a taxi. He became sick that same evening, and 4 days later, he was dead. After an
This actually has happened a number of times in Western countries where, even in the last couple of decades, where people have been mysteriously assassinated by some kind of object like ricin or like radioactive poison of some kind.
Autopsy, a metal pellet with drilled holes was discovered in his leg, and the media went crazy over the umbrella murder story. On paper, this sounds like a textbook espionage dub for the Eastern Bloc, but then again, when the Bulgarian umbrella is more present in Western media than actual history, who really benefited most at the end of the day? I mean, I don't know if you can really call an episode of NCIS as capitalizing more than an actual assassination. You're right, I'm just being facetious. The Soviets definitely take the intelligence dub in this bout. While the CIA get points for creativity, coming up with an intricate and elaborate cyborg cat spy thing, the Soviets kept it simple. Squeeze air and poison go forward. So Alex, the lesson here is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how cunning or crafty you try to be, you'll never be as effective as good old-fashioned murder. Next up is the science victory, and what better bout of science and history is there than the space race?
I do like that he's using the civilization victory conditions as a way to judge this. It's pretty cool.
The space race was a competition between the Americans and Soviets for superior spaceflight capability, and while many people today think this was settled when Elon bitch-slapped Bezos by putting a Tesla into orbit, the real story is much more nuanced. Both nations have their aerospace origins in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, with Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Robert Goddard, who are considered two of the founding fathers of aeronautics. Both of these guys made a bunch of important early rocket advancements. For example, Goddard is notable for inventing the first liquid-fueled rocket. Sir, I did it! Come quick! The Soviets are so fucked in 40 years. Most people crown the Nazis as the sole king of early rocketry, but both the US and Soviets have been progressing in these fields as well. In fact, the Soviets' rocket tech was on par with the Nazis in the early 1930s. That is, until Stalin's policies slowed things down a bit.
And that's the thing. Science is only part of it. How much money and manpower that gets put behind it is what makes the difference. For example, when it came to nuclear technology, all the early scientific work, significant scientific work, the major advances are being done by the Germans, but it's the United States who puts the massive amount of manpower and money into developing the bomb that finally makes it happen. And it's the same thing in the 60s with the space race. It's the manpower, the money, the hours that are spent developing this stuff that really makes it happen. And it goes to show what is possible for a nation or for people when you do put that kind of massive push behind something.
What are you talking about? Ah! Jesus Christ! Nevertheless, the Soviets kicked off the space race by launching the first ever artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, a big metal ball with 4 antennas, a clear nod to the all-powerful flying spaghetti monster. Inside the little satellite was a radio that transmitted menacing beeps to the people below, sending a clear message of its existence and terrifying Americans as it flew overhead.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like not a big deal now, but at the time, the fact that they had put something into orbit in space that made people think, okay, if they can put that up there, what else can they put up there? And that includes nuclear missiles, bombs, anything. How can they spy on us now? I mean, this, just do the math in your head about the panic that would have ensued. potentially from all of this.
Welcome back to WTTL, your station for all things Elvis. But first, a message from our sponsor, Dr. Lang's Lobotomies. Ideal for hysterical women. Use code BRAINBLAST for 20% off for Noggin November. And remember, you're one snip away from a wife who obeys.
Yeah, oh, I hate that. The Soviets immediately responded with Sputnik 2, this time putting the first animal into orbit, a dog named Laika. They just snatched a random stray, figuring if anything can survive the hellscape that was the Moscow streets, then the literal exosphere shouldn't be that different. After a bunch of training, Laika was strapped up and launched into orbit. She was never intended to survive the mission, so they planned to ease her suffering with some poisoned food later in the trip, which would have been great if she hadn't been roasted in a makeshift air fryer in the first few hours when an engine failed to separate. This could be due to the fact that the spacecraft was both designed and built in only 4 weeks in order to hit the launch deadline.
And you might think, well, that happened to animals. It would never happen to people. But unfortunately, something similar happens to people, too. You have a couple of incidents on both sides where people die. In the case of the Americans, Apollo 1, but it's on the ground. The Soviets have this incident with a cosmonaut who crashes to Earth. It's horrible. And he knew he was going to die. Like, he knew that re-entry was not going the way it was supposed to.
America responded with their own launch in the formation of NASA. Both sides are now just popping off more satellites, dogs, monkeys, and finally naked monkeys, with Yuri Gagarin beating Alan Shepard to the punch as first talking animal in space by just a few weeks. Things then started getting real serious when John F. Kennedy got elected and announced the US would throw a dude on that cool rock in the sky by the end of the decade.
And at the time, we weren't even close. I mean, we were nowhere near. We had just put a man in space. The space program is brand new, and Kennedy's talking landing a man on the moon and bringing him back safely. But this is the kind of just ridiculous goal setting that was necessary. And then the money and the time and the brains were going to be put behind it, the resources, once that goal had been set. That's the only way something like this could have happened.
Congratulations on your election, President Kennedy. Just to get you up to speed on things, the Cold War has been progressing. Cold War, huh? I'll show those Soviets cold. Grab those NASA nerds, General. We're going to space. No, not that kind of cold. Fuck it, the moon. But don't. Right away, sir. Consider it done. Good. Sorry about that. He would have just kept going. Does he seriously not know what Cold War means? Just humor him for now. All problems will be solved in Dallas. After many achievements on both sides, like the first spacewalk and the first docking in space, the US would go on to do just that, fulfilling man's innate desire to secure the biggest rock on the playground with the Apollo program. While putting a guy on the moon is cool and all, it's not as cool as the first living beings to reach the moon, tortoises. The Soviets decided to shoot a pair of them around the moon, probably because they saw America put out a movie called Planet of the Apes and were like, suka blitz, choosing an animal with natural armor in case any space monkeys came clubbing. I think you know that's not the case. We're talking about spaceflight, Alex. Can't you let a bird dream? The tortoises made it around the moon, and unlike earlier, these animals returned safely to be rescued and dissected. The US also had its fun share of animals in space. My favorite being the time they shot a bunch of jellyfish into the cosmos. For science.
Really?
They swear. 2,000 of the little critters went up, and chemicals were used to get them swimming and reproducing, which they did. Very well. They landed with 60,000, but once the astrofish came back, they weren't able to swim around very well because they just straight up didn't have a concept of gravity. Run, Aaron! Gravity doesn't apply to them! The space age deserves an entire video of its own, but I know you nerds are foaming at the mouth to hear who.
Yeah, he's absolutely right, and we've done some stuff. We looked at Epic History TV series on Apollo, which is such a fascinating look at how they progressed to the point of being able to put a man on the moon. So I'll throw up a link at the end to that series if you want to check it out.
Well, I think won the space race. Let me just put it this way. Between the two countries, only one killed the cutest dog I've ever seen and later had their own scientists regret it and claim they didn't get enough out of the mission to justify her death. So that's about as clear of an L as I've ever seen. And if you want my more detailed answer, you'll have to wait for my behind-the-scenes commentary on my second channel. You're really going the gatekeeping, shameless plug route? Shh, can you hear that? No, that's right. There's no one to hear you scream. Next up is the culture section, and just to be upfront, America wins this category, hands down. Kids are hitting layups in Mongolia, but for the sake of checking all our boxes, we're gonna talk about it anyway. Soda, pop, or carbo, as I guess some degenerates call.
So here where I live, we call it pop, or Coke is where a lot of people around the country call it Coke. Even if it's Pepsi, it's Coke. But if you look at a map over even the last 20 years, the area of the country that calls it pop is shrinking rapidly. Far fewer people today call it pop than even a generation ago.
Call it, is just about as synonymous with America as the bald eagle itself. And that was precisely the problem for Georgy Zhukov. Hero of the Soviet Union, defeater of Nazis, Zhukov became a big fan of Coca-Cola ever since Eisenhower introduced him to it around the time of World War II. But the delicate fizzy cocktail was banned in the Soviet Union, and Zhukov, being prominent in the public eye, couldn't be seen consuming a symbol of American imperialism.
And this is once again an opportunity for me to plug one of my all-time favorite historic dark comedy movies, The Death of Stalin, which I think is brilliant and absolutely amazing in every way. It's so funny and yet so unbelievably historically accurate despite its attempts at just being a comedy. And Jason Isaacs as Zhukov is perfect. He is so great in that role. I find myself going back and just watching the clips of him in that role. It's so good.
We know what happens when Stalin gets cranky. So he decided to reach out to US President Harry Truman for a solution to his dilemma. President Truman?
Zuki, are you considering defecting?
No, stop asking. I was actually calling to see if you could help me acquire some coke.
Well, we were saving most of it for black neighborhoods, but I think we can work something out.
No, wow, Jesus, I'm talking about Coca-Cola. I can't be seen getting it in the Soviet Union. They wouldn't allow for it. Can you help me out with this?
Maybe you could?
Other than overthrowing my government.
I'll get you one of these days. Let me see if I can work something out.
Truman reached out to Coca-Cola, who
But
then
wait,
developed...
he did help overthrow his government. There was a coup, and Zhukov was a big part of it. But it was after Stalin died. It was to overthrow Beria, and eventually Nikita Khrushchev ends up in command.
Developed White Coke, a special clear version of Coke that had its food coloring removed and was packaged in clear glass bottles with a white cap and red star. This way, when Zhukov wanted a nice refreshing Coke, the public wouldn't see their idol drinking a Yankee abomination, just half liters of vodka. In the image of war hero turned alcoholic veteran was a Soviet-fitting brand the public could very much so get behind. But let's check on America and the yin to Coca-Cola's yang, Pepsi. In 1959, Pepsi participated in the American National Exhibition in Moscow, where we showed off what it means to be an American. Here we see Soviets observing a motionless car from behind, an allusion to driving in an East Coast city. Over here, Khrushchev is experiencing the wonder that is an American kitchen. Will he try his hand at...
And you can see there standing with him is, I believe we've got Nixon right here, and that might be Brezhnev behind him. I can't really tell for sure. That's definitely Richard Nixon, who is the second youngest vice president in American history. Only John C. Breckinridge was younger than him.
operating the washing machine? No, they brought a woman for that. Gee, watching your wife work sure is tiring. How about a nice refreshing Pepsi to take the edge off? This photo was exactly the marketing juice PepsiCo needed in the ongoing cola wars, and it led to Pepsi acquiring a monopoly on cola in the Soviet Union. With restrictions on the ruble, Pepsi exchanged their scrumptious syrup for vodka, which they could then sell for cash. This deal remained in place until Pepsi's growth outpaced the vodka's growth, leading to a renegotiation. Yeah, this vodka deal was great and all, but there are only so many kids with fake IDs in the States. Not to worry, comrade, we've arranged an offer for you. What is this? Something to go with Naval Fleet. Ah, there it is. What are you doing? You wanted me to bring something new to the table, so I bring ships to table. Thank you, Igor. Пожалуйста. Figuratively! Bring something figuratively to the table! And why would I want a naval fleet? To help with your current conflict with Coca-Cola. You are in Cola War, are you not? Figuratively! The Soviet Union gave Pepsi 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer as payment for soda. You may have heard this story before, as it's become somewhat of an internet legend in recent years, with articles in your know-it-all nerd
Navy
friend Kevin claiming this trade made Pepsi the 6th largest navy in the world at the time. This actually wasn't quite the case. These vessels were outdated and gonna be sold for scrap, but even still, they wouldn't have made Pepsi even remotely close to the 6th largest navy in the world at the time. In fact, when I dug into this story deeper, there seemed to be a lot of scrutiny as to whether or not this even happened in the first place. I was able to find 2 articles from 1989 claiming the sale did take place, and political expert Dr. Paul Musgrave wrote a feature about the story, and says that it definitely happened and is attested to in other sources. To me, it seems most likely that Pepsi acted as a sort of middleman in the exchange of Pepsi for a few $1 million worth of Soviet vessels.
Yeah, Pepsi did not operate this navy. They weren't like sailing around with Pepsi employees manning nuclear submarines or anything like that.
Scrappage. But this was just a small fry compared to the big kahuna that would transpire the coming year. A multi-billion-dollar deal where the Soviets would build brand spanking new oil tankers for Pepsi. That's right, liquid gold for fizz to behold. Things were starting to look up for little old Pepsi. Well, surely a multi-decade monopoly would consolidate a strong lead in the market. Oh, that's embarrassing. Last but not least, we have the military category. The US and Soviets had to get creative with this one, as in the world of nuclear juiciness, we typically want to avoid terraforming the Earth into a radioactive wasteland. But the moon is fair game. It's 1958. Americans are panicking after the Sputnik launch, and the US needed a strong response to show they weren't falling behind. Okay, boys, where's Captain Lloyd? I believe he's taking his wife to an appointment at Dr. Lang's lobotomies. About time. Anyway, let's get started. We need to do something big to boost public morale.
A lobotomy is a procedure that was actually done a lot, including on JFK's sister. It was believed to, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but basically what you were doing was you inserted like a rod. Sometimes they would go out like through the eyes, but like basically it separated the frontal lobe from the rest of the brain, and it was meant to calm people who had like some severe mental illness. But basically it just kind of almost turned you into like a walking vegetable. It's pretty sad, really, when you look into the history of why these lobotomies were done and who they were done on.
What do you got for us, General Clint? The Army is working on our own satellite program. I say we put our faith in the Explorer 1 launch. That'll be good, but we'd still only be second. What about you, Major Tom? I believe we should focus on Project Mercury, sir, and putting the first man in space. Good, I like it. And your thoughts, Alfred the Moon Hater? The United States kicked off Project A119, a plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon's surface. Their hope was that the explosion would be large enough to be visible from Earth with the naked eye, and consequently boost public morale once they witnessed the extent of America's might. But
like I said, people are in these meetings, they're just throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. And if somebody in your meeting says, I like that idea, it moves up the next level in the chain of command. And some of the stuff that moved up the chain of command but never got all the way, finally it got to somebody who was like, nah, I don't think we're going to do that.
But of course, they'd need to sell some additional reasons beyond explosions are sick, bro. So it would help answer some rudimentary astrogeological questions? What? Yeah, science and shit. A team of America's top minds got to work calculating the sweet spot between popping off the world's most expensive firecracker and flashbanging the northern hemisphere while kinetically bombarding Venus. They landed on a warhead with a 1.7 kiloton yield, detonated right on the ironically named Terminator line, where the light side of the moon touches the dark side, but not too far over where it's all dark and scary. While it was found to be technologically feasible, this project was canceled for a few reasons. One, they were afraid of the danger to the public if the launch were to fail, which if we just take a peek at launch success rates in the 50s and 60s, we'd call this worrisome. Two, potential nuclear fallout would have made the moon landing photos look less like a heroic triumph and more like an HBO show. And three, because they feared exploding nukes on the moon might look, you know, cartoonishly evil or something. Personally, if it were up to me, I'd say act first, make YouTube apologies later.
So a lot of... Oh man, I know what that's referring to with the apology. My daughter informed me on that one with the girl that sang, and oh, ridiculous. Anyway, PR's a big part of all of this. It's not just about actually accomplishing things. A lot of it is about how it looks, and not only how it looks to your friends, but how it looks to your potential enemies as well. PR is a constant part of your decision-making process.
That's why we wouldn't put you in positions of power. Right you are, Alex. I would just take it by force. But how to overthrow a democratic government is a video for another day. Let's see what the Russians have in store for the military category. Long-range bombers were all the rage in the mid-20th century. After all, you needed some way to bring the bigger and brighter suns you're building to all your friends. And with advancements in anti-air shooty things, these bombers needed to fly higher and faster to keep their spicy little presence safe. Introducing the Tu-22, the first supersonic bomber to enter no production in the Soviet Union, even after both prototypes were destroyed in testing, killing multiple people. Third time's the charm, eh? Begin full production, we'll fix it on the go. And fix it on the go, they did not. While it had an intimidating look that was really hammered home by some impressive chompers, this would turn out to be more of a warning to its own crew than adversaries, as it was plagued with a stupendous amount of serious problems. Design issues included wings that would deform and partially melt at high speeds, terrible stability that had the pilot essentially arm wrestling the yoke the entire flight to keep being a plane, and a terrible cockpit layout that was described as a, quote, inverted hedgehog, with levers so far out of reach that pilots had to improvise ropes and hooks to operate them. But perhaps my favorite design flaw was the ejection system, which didn't shoot crewmen upwards like you'd imagine. That's where the precariously placed turbines sat hungry for breakfast, but rather below the plane, where the ground is. This meant that ejections were only safe above 350 meters, and when you take into account most accidents occurred during takeoff and landing, you might as well stick it out if you run into trouble on the runway, or risk being turned into fertilizer. There were even times where people just straight up fell out of the plane. Granted, this would happen while the aircraft was parked and safely intact.
And let's be fair, there were plenty of people who died in training accidents in the U.S. as well, in testing new planes and pushing these planes to the limits. You want a great example of that? Watch the movie or the series The Right Stuff. I guess it is. Is it a movie? Yeah, it's a movie. Watch The Right Stuff and watch how they portray at the beginning how these test pilots had really short lifespans in many cases.
Unlike the crew's spines. All of this would earn the bomber one of its many colorful nicknames, Man-Eater, due to its quirky little knack of killing many of its own crewmen with an astronomical failure rate of 70 units lost out of 311 produced. For my Baldur's Gate friends out there, that's roughly equivalent to rolling a D4, and if it's a 1, you die. All things considered, pilots were not very excited to fly this death trap. However, it was an extremely sought after assignment for crews, and that, my dear Alex, can be traced back to the coolant system. Coolant? That's right, Alex. The cockpit had an overheating problem that was solved with an evaporator supplied with a shocking amount of coolant. This coolant was a mixture of 60% distilled water and 40% ethanol. And when we pour that into our handy little analyzer here, it ran on vodka? It ran on vodka, yes. Naturally, there were numerous reports of crews drinking the plane's coolant and getting, quote, paralytically drunk, earning the plane its most popular nickname, Supersonic Booze Carrier. Pilots of the bomber even had complete control over how much coolant was consumed during flight, or if any was used at all. Jesus, you look terrible. My name's actually Vlad, but thank you, sir. I just need to cool off. Did you and Alec run out of coolant? Oh yeah, we used it up real fast, and we didn't kiss or anything. What? I'm just saying, I didn't kiss a guy. I was just asking. You're just coming off really accusatory, and I just want to be crystal clear that I did not gingerly touch lips with Alec. Nothing happened. Right.
That was awesome.
Do you need more coolant then? That would be most appreciated. Interestingly, it appeared as though the coolant was utilized with a shocking efficiency, as aircrews post-flight reports would show 100% of it was used during flights. The Air Force would later crack down on this, restricting access to bombers between flights and closely monitoring coolant levels. However, keeping Russians from vodka is like trying to keep predators from Roblox, so they found a way to keep the practice alive anyway. While neither of these stories are really strong wins for either side, I'd have to award the Soviets the point for this one, as between the two, well, it actually happened, and for all its flaws— You mean people dying? For all its flaws, it at least helped boost airman morale. And as my cool college friends—
I don't agree on the Soviets winning the military part of the Cold War.
Scott once said, stop bringing your Game Boy to the club. I mean, when life leaves you drowning in stress, might as well choose the liquid. He flunked out, but I think the wisdom still stands. So, Alex, looks like we've got a solid tie here. Think you've got what it takes to win this Cold War? What? Half of these stories were disasters. I didn't learn anything useful. I've got no idea what to do. Alex. What did Scott say about drowning? Choose the fluid? Choose the fluid, Alex. Attaboy. Now plug my merch. Good. The Cold War. 9 out of 10 stars.
So it was really about entertainment, but a lot of great information in there, a lot of stuff that actually is real history. So hope you guys enjoyed that. That was very entertaining, quite hilarious, but also really interesting, and I learned a few things I didn't know before as well. So I'll throw up the links here to the video about the Apollo program, which we did a while back, which I think was really well done and fascinating. And please check out some of the other channels. The gaming channel, I'm hoping to get us pushed over 70,000 subscribers in the next few days. And VTH Extra, and also the new channel, Stories of the Great War. Thanks for watching.